Hello. Welcome to the Convict Diaries. The stories and songs of the bushrangers offer a unique window into Australia's early attitudes toward crime, family, race, and justice. These ballads and legends, passed down through generations, reflect a society grappling with issues of law and order in a harsh and often lawless frontier. Bushrangers were both feared and romanticized. Some were seen as ruthless criminals, while others became folk heroes who challenged authority and fought against perceived injustices. Their tales highlight the blurred line between villainy and heroism in colonial Australia, where economic hardship, convict heritage, and a deep distrust of British rule fueled sympathy for outlaws. Today we will look at the bushranger best known as Captain Melville. Francis Melville, who used the aliases of McNeice, McNeil, McCallum, but better known as Captain Melville, was a Scottish-born Australian bushranger whose life encapsulates the tumultuous era of the Victorian gold rush. He was probably born in Scotland. McCallum's early years were marred by criminal activities, leading to his transportation to Van Diemen's Land, now Tasmania, and his eventual emergence as one of Australia's most notorious bushrangers. Francis Melville, born in 1822, a notorious bushranger, was likely born as Francis McNeice McNeil or McCallum in Inverness, Scotland. Though he received some schooling, he turned to theft around the age of 12. Before he turned 15, he had already served multiple short sentences. On the 3rd of October 1836, at the age of 15, McCallum was convicted of housebreaking in Perth, Scotland, and sentenced to 7 years transportation. Under the name Edward Melville, or Mulville, he spent 20 months in English prisons before being transported to Hobart Town aboard the Minerva, arriving on 29 September 1838. In October of that year, due to his youth, he was placed in the Point Pure Institution for Juvenile Convicts at Port Arthur. McCallum's behaviour remained incorrigible, so between 1839 and 48, he appeared before the police magistrate 25 times. In 1841, his sentence was extended, first by 2 years for felony in February, then to life for burglary in July. By September, he had been sent to Port Arthur for 5 years. Melville was recommended for a year's probation in 1846. Melville absconded, living with Aboriginal people for a year before being recaptured. His defiance led to harsh punishments, including 9 months of hard labour in chains, a sentence he endured again in both January and August 1850. After multiple escape attempts and periods of absconding, McCallum successfully fled to mainland Australia around 1851, and by December of that year, he had turned bushranger. He adopted the nickname Captain Melville, and he claimed leadership of the Mount Macedon gang that was operating in the Black Forest region between Melbourne and Bendigo. His exploits during this period were marked by audacious robberies, particularly targeting gold prospectors and travellers. Melville cultivated a reputation for chivalry, especially towards women, which contributed to a certain folk hero status. In 1852, Francis Melville held up Alfred Joyce at Norwood Station and patrolled the western track from the central goldfields across the Wimmera, preying on travellers. Due to legend, the police nearly captured him near Mount Arapiles, where he supposedly was hiding out in a cave. During the shearing season at One Wonder, he extravagantly paid for a lost horse to be found and a breakfast to be prepared. On the Fiery Creek Plains, Melville and 2 companions met Charles Carter and his sons, travelling with drays across the plains. However, the Carters were well armed, and their defence deterred the bushrangers, who rode off, later staging a robbery of teamsters at Rokewood. In early November, Melville trailed a digger to Maryvale Station, where he robbed him and took the station manager captive. By early December, Melville had moved into the Western District. At Merida Yallock, he forced the Mackinnon sisters to entertain him, even singing and playing the piano before disappearing. On December 18, in the company of William Roberts, he held up 16 men at a shearing shed in Wodie Yallock, robbing the owner and 3 others. The next day, at Bruce's Creek, they stole £37 from Thomas Warren and William Madden but returned £10 for their travel expenses. On Christmas Eve, they held up 2 bush workers at Fiansford. In Geelong, Melville and Roberts dined at Christie's Inn and visited a brothel. Melville's arrogance, combined with £100 bounty on his head, led a woman to tip off the police. When officers arrived, Melville smashed a window and escaped into the street, knocking down a policeman as he fled toward Ballarat Road. However, he was intercepted by Henry Guy on horseback. When Melville tried to seize the horse, it bolted, and Guy grappled with him until police arrived. Roberts had already been arrested, and both spent Christmas in South Geelong Gaol. On January 3, 1853, Captain Foster Fynes committed them for trial. The following month, Judge Redmond Barry sentenced Melville to 32 years of hard labour for highway robbery, horse stealing, and assault. He was imprisoned aboard the prison hulk President, where, on June 4, he attempted to bite off a sergeant's nose. In response, the warders brutally beat him and confined him to solitary for 20 days. On January 20, 1854, he received another month in isolation for inciting mutiny. Later that year, John Price transferred Melville to the Hulk Success, allowing him to work at the Point Gellibrand quarry. He appeared reformed, allegedly translating the Bible into an Aboriginal language, but the reality was that he was plotting an escape with former ship's captain Billy Stevens. Accompanied by 8 accomplices, which includes the future bushranger Harry Power, they planned to seize a cutter and flee to Gippsland. During the escape, the gang hijacked a towboat and took a hostage. Poor Constable Owens. Rowing into Hobson's Bay as Melville shouted, "Goodbye at last" to Victoria. However, as police and guard boats closed in, Stevens killed Owens with a blow to the skull before leaping into the sea to his death. Captured once again, Melville allegedly declared, "I would sooner die than suffer what I have endured in these hulks for the past 4 years. A citizens' committee hired Dr. Mackay to defend the convicts, but Melville chose to argue his own case in court. On November 19, 1855, he stood trial as Thomas Smith, alias Frank Callum, alias Captain Melville, before Judge Robert Molesworth. Melville competently challenged police claims that he had murdered Owens, but Molesworth ruled that all escapees were guilty since a death had occurred in custody. Melville argued that he had been charged under a false name, that he was sentenced to road labour rather than imprisonment in a hulk, and that his detention in the quarry was unlawful. Despite his defence, he and 2 accomplices were sentenced to death, though the case was later referred to the full court. The Citizens Committee secured the acquittal of 6 others and launched a public campaign demanding an inquiry into the penal department and Melville's pardon. On Christmas Eve in 1852, Melville and an accomplice, William Robert Roberts, were apprehended at a brothel in Geelong. In February 1853, they were tried and convicted on multiple counts of robbery, with Melville receiving a cumulative sentence of 32 years. He was incarcerated aboard the prison hulk Success in Port Phillip Bay. Conditions on these hulks were notoriously harsh, leading to unrest among the prisoners. In October 1856, Melville participated in an attempted escape from the Success. The plan involved seizing a boat, however, it resulted in the death of a warden and a fellow convict. The escapees were quickly recaptured, and Melville was subsequently sentenced to death. This sentence was later commuted due to legal technicalities concerning the validity of his detention. He was then transferred to the Melbourne gaol. There are different dates given for his death. At dawn on 12th, or perhaps the 10th, of August 1857, a warder found him strangled by a scarf, perhaps a red-spotted blue scarf. The cause of death was suffocation, but whether he committed suicide or was murdered has never been decided. Captain Melville's life and exploits have been the subject of various cultural works, including Frank Clune's 1956 biography, Captain Melville. His story serves as a window into the complexities of colonial Australia's penal system and the societal conditions that gave rise to bushranging. Melville's blend of criminality and perceived gallantry has left an indelible mark on Australian folklore, reflecting the nation's ambivalent relationship with its outlaw past.